Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining PHCA for today's webinar on succession planning. I'm Wendy Johnson with the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association. PHCA offers monthly webinars to members to receive updates from department staff on regulations, learn from industry experts on current trends and practices, and gain a better understanding of practical application tools to equip you so that you can continue to provide the highest level of quality care possible. Before we begin, I have a few housekeeping items to cover. This webinar is being recorded and will be made available on the PHCA website by no later than the close of business today. The webinar has been approved for 1 continuing education credit for nursing home, assisted living, and personal care home administrators. Certificates will be emailed later today along with a link to a survey. Please complete the survey, and if you are participating in a group setting, have each participant also complete the survey. All attendees will be in listen-only mode. However, throughout the presentation, please feel free to submit questions using your questions pane on the right hand of your screen, and our presenter will address them at the end of the presentation. Now for today's webinar. This webinar will be presented by Karen Fortier, Risk Manager Executive with Brown & Brown Insurance of the Lehigh Valley. Succession planning is in an organization goes well beyond the top level positions. This 1-hour webinar will describe the succession development plan process, including the identification of current talent, where gaps exist, and how to prepare your talent for future positions within the organization. Several models and tools will be provided to participants to develop a comprehensive development plan for their talent and create an organization-wide succession plan. Upon completion of the webinar, participants will be able to explain the performance management process, define competencies needed for specified positions or for specific positions within the organization, identify and access current talent for the specified positions, and lastly, develop a succession plan. I'm going to turn the floor over to Karen now. Karen, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Wendy, and thank you for having me. And thank you to all of you who are on the line. And boy, that description sure sounds like it's a lot, and there is a lot of material that we will review today. Hopefully that it will be helpful for you, and I do not certainly expect you all to walk out having your succession plan finished. Rather, you will have the tools that you need in order to do that. And I want to step back and just talk a little bit about myself, because I'm sure people on the phone are wondering how a risk management person has any knowledge of succession planning. So just to let you all know, I'm new to the risk manager position as far as the Brown & Brown Insurance position goes. My background, I have spent 25 years working in the human service arena, and I also have a PhD in industrial organizational psychology, where I studied a lot of the organizational development pieces, including succession planning. So that's where that background comes from, not so much from being a risk manager per se, but from my other background before I moved into this position. So as Wendy said in the description there, succession planning, most of us think of that as, okay, who's going to take over when the CEO retires or leaves? And succession planning, I would argue, goes much further than that and should go all through all levels, all the way down to your frontline supervisors. And can we do that in a day? Certainly not, but hopefully this presentation will help you at least get started with that. So there are 2 parts really to the succession planning process. And the part 1 is identifying your talent, and part 2 is reviewing those people, reviewing the talent. And you see the 8 steps listed here. We are going to review each piece of this as we go through the webinar. So as we think about identifying our talent, I bet each of you on the phone, if I asked you, could tell me who your high performers are and who your low performers are. We just have a sense of that based on the work that they do, whether they are your subordinates or your coworkers, People seem to know that. But what we're asking for here in this talent identification piece is to take a more formal look at that and a more objective look at your staff, at the people that you have working with you, to see where they fall in this network. And why do we want to do that? Well, identifying our talent is really one of the key pieces in the process of building a strong organization. And maybe it will help you to think of it in this term, that the CEO has to ask the question, do I have the organizational capability to run and grow my business? So this is the question that we want to answer with our talent identification. At the director level, it helps you build functional capability and sustainable bench strength. And bench strength is one of my favorite terms. To put it in light, if any of you are sports fans, if you think about bench strength in that way, I'm a big hockey fan, so you think there are at least 4 different lines of hockey players that come out and play. The deeper your roster or the stronger your bench, then the better each of those lines play. So you want your 4th line players to be as good as your front line players. And that's what we're looking for here. So we want to have strengths across all areas of our agencies and at all levels in the agency. So we're trying to build that bench strength so that, in a sense, if a manager, director, or heaven forbid the CEO get hit by the proverbial bus tomorrow, who could take their place? So that's the question that we need to think about. And of course, we're going to leverage the competency-based development, which is what we're going to look at, as a foundation for building the capability within our staff. So aside from your gut feeling of who your high performers and low performers are, how do you really know who your talent is? So the first step in the talent identification is the competency model. I'm not going to read each of these slides to you, but we'll talk a little bit about them. One of the key features is in the job description. So I ask all of you, when's the last time you actually looked at your job description and fully read it to see if it met the duties of your job? If your job is like mine, the last job that I had, probably 50% of my duties were not specifically listed in my job description. And people ask me what I do, and I used to say it's about 80% other duties as assigned. Of course, we always have that clause in there because things come up. But I would suggest that you look at these job descriptions at least on an annual basis. As you're doing performance reviews with your staff, pull up the job description and review it to see if it is still accurate. Things change from year to year. Things change from day to day, as we all know. And we want to make sure that job description accurately reflects the competencies that you need for that job. And there are other HR issues as to why that should be accurate, but we're going to stick with just the succession planning piece for today. And those duties should also match your agency mission and vision. Everything that we do should be driven by our mission and vision of the agency. So that's a key piece. And then culture. How many of you can define the culture of your agency specifically and in one sentence? It's a very difficult thing to do. Again, a whole other training topic. But the job descriptions, the competencies that we require should match the culture also. And of course, these things vary by department and by position. Each position has different requirements. But it is very important to review those. The examples listed on here are some of the examples we might think of for leadership positions that are more soft skills. They're a little bit more difficult to measure, but still extremely important when you're thinking about leadership. We need someone who works as a team. We need someone who has analytical thinking, who can manage change. All of these things on here are very, very important, especially for those leadership roles. Then step 2 is the performance management and potential. So in addition to the competencies that we've defined, you also want to look at commitment of your staff. If you have someone who has all the competencies and has that commitment, that's that yes, yes box with the star on it. Those are the folks that you want to have in the top of your mind, and those are probably your high performers as they are now. You have people who have the competencies but don't have the commitment, and then you want to maybe talk to them about why they don't have that commitment. Are they just in the wrong job, wrong position at the agency, or is it just a bad fit as far as the overall career piece goes? You have people who don't have the competencies but who do have the commitment. That's that bottom yellow box on the right-hand side. If they've got the commitment but not the competencies, we can teach them the competencies. So those are also some folks you want to keep in mind. If they don't have the competencies and don't have the commitment, then you want to think of some other avenues for that person. And keep in mind that most of the time in human services, at least in my experience, people get promoted to a leadership position because they do very well in their current position. And I challenge all of you to think that just because you're a good clinician, a good direct support person, whatever your position is, does not necessarily mean you will be a good leader. Leadership is a different set of skills that an individual needs to have. And oftentimes they get promoted and they get thrown into the fire without given that support and training in leadership. So something to keep in mind there as you are looking to promote people. Potential assessment, this is not a potential assessment, but it's assessing the potential of your staff. I should probably change the way that one is worded at the top. But it's the current or future capacity to effectively assume higher levels of complexity. Again, not necessarily leadership, but how can they continue to grow in their position? We want folks here who are going to stay long term. I know turnover is a huge issue. And hopefully by providing your high performers with more opportunities to learn and grow, that they would stay on longer. So this will actually help improve your retention as well. We want to look at folks, again, for succession planning, looking for folks to move up. We want that ambition, the desire to be a leader. If somebody does not want to be a leader, then this process maybe isn't the best for them. And that's okay. Some people excel in the position that they're in, and that's just where they want to stay. And we can certainly take advantage of them in that position. And we will talk a little bit more about that later on. We want folks who demonstrate the core values of the agency, right? They match our ethics. They match our culture. They have a strong performance among their peers. Again, you know who your high performers are. And again, for leadership roles, we're looking for people management. So if you're doing employee surveys, if you're getting feedback from your managers, performance evaluations, we collect a lot of data that we don't necessarily use effectively. Some of it is objective, some of it is more subjective, but we want to look at all of that data that we have. And we want to make sure that we are measuring those competencies at an appropriate level. Again, it's very important to stay objective with that so that you're not expecting more from one staff than the other staff when their jobs are exactly the same. Mobility is on here as something to think about if that's important to you. If you have staff who are required to drive from one site to another site, mobility might be important. When I got some of this training in the past, I was in the training with some folks who had international businesses or businesses that spanned various states. So mobility, being able to move from one to the other to do jobs, was very important for them. So that might be one that's not important to you. This is certainly not a comprehensive list. You know, I encourage you to go back to your sites and think about what the competencies are for your agency and for your particular site that would be beneficial for your staff to have. Then once you've assessed that potential, the next step is looking at career and development for those folks. And again, I want to stress this does not necessarily have to be a promotion. I know that the organizational structure in many nonprofits are very lean at the top. There's one CEO, there's generally one COO, maybe two if you're a very large organization. So there are fewer positions at the top than there are in the direct support level. And that's by design because our services are there to provide services to the folks coming in, and we need the staff to do that. But we can think outside the box as far as what else we can do to help develop this individual in a professional manner. Is there additional training that they can get? Certainly coaching and feedback, and I'm sure you've heard a lot about that lately. Are there new positions that can be created? Are there just project assignments? Maybe you have a quality improvement project that's going on. Can someone be pulled to participate in that as kind of a stretch assignment for them that's outside of their normal job duties, but something that they can participate in to help them grow and learn? And some examples of that, again, in my last job, one of those other duties as assigned was to lead the intranet team So we had an internal intranet site just for staff, and some of you probably have those as well. So I led the group that came up with the content for that, and one of our big things was we wanted to change content at least weekly to keep it fresh, to keep it updated, to keep people coming back to that site so that they could learn information, because we wanted it to be the information hub for our staff, and this was a brand new project for us. So I was able to pull some staff from other areas across the agency who would not normally be considered for a committee like that, but bring them in as something different for them to learn about. So they got to meet other people, they got to learn about the intranet site, they got to add content based on their area of expertise, and just a great opportunity for them to learn and grow a little bit outside of their normal position. So things like that. There was no extra money involved in that. Compensation, of course, is always the one that you hear. And I will also tell you, we need to make enough money to pay our bills. No one is in human services to get rich. We know that. But beyond that, compensation really is not a huge motivator for people. People want that feedback. People want to be able to try new opportunities, to do new things, those kinds of things. So think outside the box, and maybe it's something as simple as a staff person becoming the sunshine committee, if you will, and sending out birthday cards to staff on their birthdays. It can be something simple like that doesn't cost a lot of money, because I know budgets are very, very important. But think outside the box for some other opportunities that don't necessarily need to be a promotion. So that's the talent identification piece, and we'll move into the people review piece, which is the second section of the succession planning. So now you've identified your talent. What do we do? So now we need to review them. So you want to, and the objective is listed up there. I'm not going to read that to you. So there are 4 steps in this process. We're going to create an organizational chart for your direct reports. We're going to use that talent assessment to document where your talent is. Then we're going to complete a leadership capability assessment, and then finally create that organizational succession plan. And you all say, wow, that's a lot of work, that's a lot of people, especially in a large organization. And you're right. So if you're starting this at your agency, the way that I have started this in the past is really think about what are those key positions. Obviously, the CEO is one. But think about, they don't necessarily have to be the top level positions. What are the key positions? A couple of ones that I thought of in the last place I worked, again, our payroll person. She was not a manager, but if we can't pay our staff, we are in trouble. So we consider that to be a key position. Also, our electronic health record administrator. Without him, without being able to document in our electronic health record and subsequently bill for our services, again, the agency would be in hot water. So we considered his position to be a key position, even though it was not a director level. So think about what your true key positions are. If that person left, your agency would be in trouble. That's kind of the question that you have to ask yourself. Who are in those positions that if they left today, we would not make it very far without them? So in an organizational chart, you see in the colored band here the different categories of assessing that potential. So what you want to do, and I'll show you actually a pictorial view of this organizational chart, but for each staff person, you want their name, their title, their performance rating. So if you do an annual performance evaluation, what's their score? If you have scores, and I know the new thing in performance evaluations is to not even have a score. But if you have a score, what is that? How many years of service do they have at your agency? And you may want to consider how many years of service in the general arena overall, and how long they have been in their current position. Just some informational items there. And then you want to look at, is their performance outstanding, highly effective, they're performing, they need improvement, unsatisfactory, or if they're a new hire, it really isn't fair to put them on the rest of that scale. So we do have a category for new hire. And the colors are there for a reason, because when we actually put this into a document, we want to have something in that color so that we can easily see where this individual is when we look at this. The keys here are you have to stay as objective as possible. You cannot say, well, I like this person, so I'm going to give them an outstanding. I don't care for this person so much, even though they do a good job, so I'm going to list them as needs improvement. This must be objective and honest. And the organizational chart and the next step are highly confidential. They are not to be shared with staff. So they should not be seeing this information. This should just be for the directors to look at. And that might be a key there, because if you're keeping it extremely confidential, then you don't have to worry about who is seeing what and people getting upset by what rating they received on here. So this is a confidential document. Again, you want to be as objective as possible and be very honest. Be very honest with yourself, just because, and this is not judgmental. You want to know where this person is right now so that you can help them improve. Or if they choose not to improve or it's not working out, then you want to help them move on to something that's more appropriate for them that benefits both them and you as an agency, because we know a low performer can really drag us down. And just because they're performing low where they're at does not mean that they're a bad person. It just means that it's a bad fit with that job. So just keep that in mind as well. So the talent assessment, so for each person that you look at, and for your upper level staff especially, so for your directors, chiefs, those kinds of positions, you can consider using a small group to look at some of these, and that's how I've done it in the past, because you want to get more input from folks. And when you're rating your own direct staff, there may not be other people who know them well enough to be able to give input. But at that senior level, you all tend to work together, so you can certainly get additional input on there. So looking at this chart, it looks like a lot. Again, color-coded. So the folks that fall in the green categories are really great. The folks that fall in the yellow categories just need a little booster in one way or another, and we'll talk about the ratings in a second. Those that fall in the red category there are the people that you might want to consider helping move on to something more appropriate. So looking at the green, or excuse me, we'll look at the blue arrow. So potential assessment is on the left, going from low to high, vertically there. So that's your assessment of their potential. Where did they fall in that assessment that you did? As far as the job description, their ability to do those duties, those kinds of things. And then the performance assessment, again, is the horizontal one, going from low to high, from left to right there. So how is their performance? And of course, your high performers are going to be at the higher end, your lower performers at the lower end. So that red block is those who are low performing, but they also have low potential to perform. So those are the ones we want to move on. The ones in the green are either moderate to high performing and moderate to high potential. Those are the ones that we want to focus on. Those are your high performers. And really, we should be paying more attention to them, although the low performers generally get more of our attention. So you want to pay more attention to your high performers, and those are the ones we want to focus on for our succession planning. That's not to leave out those in the yellow. Those in the yellow, like I said, may just need some more training. They may need some more guidance in something. They may need a little bit of different work, and they should not be discounted. For example, again, at the last place that I worked, we had a director who was getting ready to retire. And he would fall in that bottom right-hand block, the yellow block there, where he was very high performance, but low potential, because he had no interest in moving up. He had no interest really in learning a lot of new things because he was getting ready to retire, so that makes sense. But he also, with that high performance, had a lot still to offer, so we still want to consider him. So just because someone is not in the green does not mean you want to throw them out. And again, on the left-hand side in those yellow blocks, you have a low performer who has high potential. If they have that potential, that means they're willing to learn. So what can we do to help them perform better? And it may be just that they're unhappy in their job, they don't like the way one thing works. So that's really a conversation to have with them about what's going on and then how you can help them get there. So hopefully that helps explain this talent assessment a little bit. And again, this should also be quite confidential at the group level. You can talk to individual staff about where they were rated there, And, excuse me, I actually took a blank one of these and wrote people's names in each block where I felt that they belonged. And at the time, we were doing just that high level. We were looking at the directors. So several of us went and did that. We came back, we compared. And then where we differed, we went through some pretty serious discussion about those individuals and why we rated them the way we did, and finally came to some consensus about where we felt that person should go. And each of us had different experiences with each of those people. So we were able to express our experiences specifically that then could help another person understand why we rated them that way. So you have the organizational chart and then the talent assessment model. And if you put those two together, then you're going to get something that looks like this, that we call the leadership capability assessment. The leadership capability assessment, you see, I made up some names and some numbers on here. I'm a Peanuts fan, so you get Charlie Brown, Lucy, and Linus. Their current role is listed there, their current performance rating, how many years of service they have, how many years in that position. So again, folks get promoted, they move around. So they might, for instance, Lucy has been with the agency for 16 years, but has been the clinical director for 10. The other piece that's listed on here that we haven't talked about is the retention risk. And what that means is, and this truly is kind of a gut feeling unless people are that open with you, you want to say either high, medium, or low, what are the chances of them leaving the agency soon? So Linus, as the HR director, has a low retention risk. Lucy has a medium retention risk, and Charlie Brown has a high retention risk, meaning Charlie Brown's looking at the door for some reason. And maybe you know what that reason is, maybe you don't. And again, that's just kind of a judgment call, but if Charlie Brown is one of your high performers, one of those in that top green category, then you want to do what you can do to keep him so that he doesn't walk out the door. Linus is a low retention risk. You don't see him going anywhere. Though you still want to focus on his career and development, it may not be as pertinent because you don't think he's going to leave anytime soon. And then you go through and you list the individual strengths, and this could be a much longer list. I just wanted a brief example to show you all here. But Charlie Brown, so he knows his fiscal background, hopefully as the CEO he would, and he also has some strengths in growing leaders. So maybe he has mentored some managers beneath him that have moved on to better pastures there. But developmental needs, maybe he needs some help with having high impact. Maybe he doesn't know each of the programs. Again, the last agency I worked at had 43 different programs. So if the CFO is not familiar with what those 43 programs does, he may need to learn that. So developmental actions, again, these should be very specific, almost like goals, but they're a little bit briefer on this form. But to me, these would be goals written out in the SMART format in their professional development plan. So we want Charlie Brown to go visit the programs and talk with the staff. He can look at the fiscal information for each program, but we want him to get a sense of how the program runs, what the staff are like, those kinds of things, what the clients that we serve are like, and we think that he can do that if he goes out and visits the programs. And of course, that would have to be scheduled out, all those kinds of things. Again, all those details that would be laid out in that professional development plan. Lucy, as clinical director, however, knows the agency. She's also very good at growing leaders, but she does not have a lot of fiscal knowledge. So we want her to get some training in fiscal, whether that be a formal training that she goes to or that be a sit down with Charlie Brown to figure out how the fiscal operations work of the agency. And we also, developing relationships apparently is not a strength for Lucy, so we actually want her to go out and meet with staff as well, and that can be formally, informally, however that becomes defined. A lot of feedback, incidentally, from staff is they like to see senior managers. They like to see them coming out to see what they're doing, to touch base with them. A concept that sometimes is called rounding. If you think about hospitals, the doctors make their rounds. They go around and see each of the patients on the roster. Staff often will tell us that they want to see the directors coming out and doing rounds. They don't have to sit down with them one-on-one per se, but they like to see them at the various sites in the various programs. And that helps the staff feel like the directors aren't making decisions in a vacuum, which they also feel like happens at the administrative level. Okay, so that's just an example of what your leadership capability assessment would look like. Again, for those key positions, you want to have each person listed there. If you have a large organization, this document could get very lengthy and very overwhelming, which is why I suggest you start at the top with those key positions. And from there, you can build down. Once you have all three of these done, then you move into your organizational succession plan. So we've gone through some of these steps. We have identified the critical positions. We've determined the needed skills, so those competencies are defined. They're in the job description, very well defined. We find and assess those potential successors, so we've identified the most obvious ones. Those are the folks that fall in the green boxes on that 9-block grid, but we're also considering others. Who else? The other thing to consider, and the department that I ran was quite unique in that there were only a few of us and we each had very different responsibilities. So if my quality manager got hit by the proverbial bus and was not able to work, looking at who would take his place, I did not have staff to draw from that reported to me or to him. So I had to look at other areas of the agency. Who else have I seen that has interest in quality improvement? And you may have to go talk to people and ask them. When you have few staff, so if you're in a smaller agency and you have very few staff, it can be a struggle to figure out who's going to move up. So you may even have to look outside your agency to other agencies. So my quality manager, if he's gone and there's no one internally that I feel could take his place or that is interested in taking his place, then do I know people at other agencies who might be willing? Is that poaching from other agencies? Some may say that it is, but it's also building your succession plan at the same time. So there is a fine line, though, that you have to kind of watch. But I just challenge you to think outside of your own department, outside of your own reporting regime, to think of others who might be interested in those positions. Again, involve leaders at all levels. And this, especially as you get further into it, further beyond those initial key positions, you need to involve the supervisors and the managers in getting their input. Even for the senior level, you may want to go to the management level and ask them who they think has competencies at the director level and why. And again, I would keep those conversations quite confident, but you could get some really good insight because oftentimes what our boss thinks of us is very different than what our subordinates think of us. So it's interesting to get different perspectives. And perhaps one of the most important things to say today is that the agency, including the CEO and all the directors, must commit to this process. It is an ongoing process, and it must be revisited consistently. This is not something that you can develop a succession plan, put some names down, and then put it on the shelf and forget about it. This is an ongoing process. It's focusing on developing those staff who may want to move up to a new position, and really who can replace who when the time comes. And it is, like I said, an ongoing process, so it must continually be looked at. And a gentleman that I worked with before actually had this leadership capability assessment. He carried it with him everywhere. Of course, he worked for a giant, I think he worked for Procter & Gamble, so a giant organization. But he carried this with him everywhere. And as he met people, he went in and looked at their ratings and where they were and those kinds of things. So I'm not asking you all to carry this around with you, but just keep in mind that it is ongoing. And you see on the bottom there, it is often more cost-effective to promote from within and often results in better leadership because you know those folks are committed to your agency, they're committed to your vision and your mission. And that being said, that's not always the best way to go. But again, part of the idea of succession planning is to build that bench so that you do have folks internally to draw from. So when you follow all of these steps, this is what it looks like. And this is what we call the succession slate. So you see across the top in the blue bar are some of the key positions that were identified, and I put some of them in that I used in the last place that I worked, including the compliance officer, which is key, the facilities manager, because if your facilities go down, you're in trouble, those kinds of things. So think of those, what those may be. We had more than this, but again, I wanted to keep it to one page for you all. Put down the incumbent, so who's currently in that position. An interim leader, so if that person was not able to come to work tomorrow, who could step in at least temporarily for them? That doesn't mean that they're ready for that position, but who could step in right now? And then the green block are those who are ready now. So who is it that could step right into that position? And frankly, the first time I did this, that section was virtually empty. And that's okay. We're doing this the first time to figure out where we are, and then we're putting those professional development plans in place to help improve that. The second step, and to put people in these blocks, you're using all of that information that you've collected. Who is one move away? And we define that as 1 to 3 years. So who was given the proper training and support would be ready for that position in 1 to 3 years. And then the second one is 2 moves away, or 3 to 5 years. So maybe someone needs a little bit more time to learn some things, but in 3 to 5 years, they may be ready to move up into that position. And again, it does not have to be within that direct line of report. If you have someone outside of your particular department who's interested in that position, then they should be considered within here as well. And just keep in mind, you will have blanks. First time I did this, I had a lot of blanks, more than I cared to realize, but putting it down on paper really helps you see, wow, I do have an issue here, and we need to do something about it. So we were able to really move forward with it. This gives it to you, I would say in black and white, but it's multicolored. So it gives it to you, though, in writing, on paper, color coordinated, so that you can see where the areas are that you need to work, and that makes it much easier then to move forward. Another thing to keep in mind that I've hinted at but have not said directly, I don't think, is keep in mind that this person must be interested in the position. You might have someone that you think would be a phenomenal communications director, but if they aren't interested in that position, then they probably shouldn't be on here. So as you start putting people on here, you do want to go have a conversation with them about, hey, I'm considering adding you to the succession slate for this particular position. Is this something that you are interested in? And if they say yes, you put them on here, and then again, you're giving them additional goals and professional development areas to work on in the meantime. So it isn't just slapping names in here, but it has to be that circular process, making sure that person is interested, and then working with them from there to build the skills and capabilities that they need. So I know this has been a tremendous amount of information, and it's very hard to present it all in 1 hour. Hopefully that this was a little bit helpful for you, and at least gave you some tips. The other thing beyond this slide is I did provide some blank tools that you are free, when Wendy sends out the handouts, you are free to print these out and use these. So this is the talent assessment, performance and potential grid that I had in color with the red, the yellow, and the green. So you can actually print this out and write people's names in it. The leadership capacity assessment, And if you have other categories you want to add in here, feel free. You'll see on this one on the very left, there's a place for a photo. And again, the gentleman that I worked with on some of this, he had photos of each of the staff there with their information. Again, because it was such a large organization, he didn't know everyone, so it was important to him to have that photo there. You don't need to do that. And again, if you have other things that you want to look at specifically that make sense for you, feel free to add them in that column. And then also the final succession slate. And again, you notice that is marked confidential. Once again, you don't want this to get out publicly. It should be held in strict confidence. And again, one final comment on that. Our CEO at the last place that I worked chose to do his own succession slate that he kept separate from all the other directors, just to keep the directors, I guess, from bickering back and forth about who was listed where. So he actually kept his separate. All the other directors and other positions went on a separate succession slate. So that's also something that you can think about. And with that, hopefully I haven't overwhelmed everyone. And Wendy, I will toss it back to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Karen, for the great information. With all of the, workforce challenges that we're having in this industry, that's really great information. I feel like that gives us a lot of hope that we can hopefully put those tools, good tools to use. Thank you for that. So at this time, we're going to open up the question and answer portion. Please submit any of your questions using the question pane on the right hand of your screen. And we'll give it a couple minutes. We're ending a little bit early, which is perfectly fine. If there's not a lot of, if there are questions, we'll certainly take the time to answer those. But if there aren't many or any questions, then we will give you a couple minutes back in your day. The other thing, don't forget, we will be sending out a follow-up email later today, and I will provide Karen's contact information along with the certificates and the link to the handout. So you'll have that information, and it'll be available on our website as well. So if you think of anything, in the next, day or two, or, even if it's next month, I know Karen is certainly open to answering, and taking any calls or emails with any questions or, advice that you might need.
I absolutely am, Wendy, and thank you for that. Folks, even if you're trying to implement this and you get stuck, or you just have questions about some of the instruments, because again, we went through this very, very quickly, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm always available to help you with these things. Or as Wendy said, if you think of a question later or just something you don't want to ask in front of the group, please feel free to email or give me a call, and I would be more than happy to work with you.
Terrific. I don't see any questions coming in. Just a reminder that we will be sending out that email. I'll be sending that out later today, and we'd ask that you complete the survey, and I'll be sending a link to the recording to today's webinar, and all of our webinars that we have done in the past are also at that link. So if there's any others that you weren't able to listen in on, and you have some extra time at some point, they're always on our website and available for your use. Just a quick plug, we're definitely looking at having for our convention, which is, wow, it seems like it's far away, next November. We are looking to have Karen back with us for either this topic or other topics around, workforce or other issues. We'd love to, provide this information. We think it's important. So we will look at scheduling Karen for a session at our convention next November, and we may look at, as we're scheduling for the 2018 webinars, we will also be looking at, if there's other topics that Karen can and others will provide. We'll have that schedule out here pretty shortly. The next webinar will be in about a month from now on January 9th, medical marijuana, which is coming into play here in the state of Pennsylvania. So that will be an important topic. The Legionella webinar will be rerun. We had a little snafu with the recording, so we'll be rerunning that through the West Virginia Healthcare Association in January, and then we're also looking at a webinar in January around the new survey process. So look for those, look for information coming out. I should have some information out later this week or early next with some of those January webinars, so be sure to look for that and get signed up for those webinars for credit. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so I'm going to just thank Karen once again for her time today on this topic, and just wish everyone a great day and a happy holiday season. Take care.
As do I, Wendy. Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks again.